For a brief moment in internet history, one website did what no platform had ever done before. It did not just connect people, it let them build an identity, broadcast their taste in music, show off their friends, and shape how they wanted the world to see them. Before influencers, before algorithms, before feeds decided what mattered, there was MySpace. And at its peak, it did not feel like a website, it felt like the internet itself. To understand why MySpace rose so fast, you have to understand what the internet looked like before it existed. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the internet was fragmented and impersonal. People gathered in forums, chat rooms, and instant messaging platforms like AOL Instant Messenger and MSN Messenger. Websites were mostly static. You visited pages, you read content, and you left. Identity online was limited to usernames, avatars, and short bios. There was no central place where a person could express who they were, what they loved, and who they associated with, all in one living, evolving space. Social interaction online existed, but it was scattered. Forums were topic based, not people based. Blogs allowed self expression, but required technical knowledge and were often isolated from each other. Music discovery happened through file sharing services like Napster or LimeWire, not through personal recommendation or social identity. The internet was functional, but it was not personal in the way younger users were beginning to crave. That hunger for identity, visibility, and connection created the perfect environment for something new to explode. MySpace was launched in 2003, created by a small group of developers who were closely watching the early success of Friendster. Friendster had proven that people wanted online profiles and visible social connections, but it was plagued by technical issues, strict controls, and a frustrating user experience. MySpace intentionally took the opposite approach. Where Friendster restricted users, MySpace gave them freedom. Where Friendster limited customization, MySpace embraced chaos. From the very beginning, MySpace was built around profiles. Each user had a page that belonged entirely to them. What made it revolutionary was that users were allowed and even encouraged to modify that page using basic HTML and CSS. With just a few copied lines of code, someone could change background images, text, colors, fonts, layout, and music. Profiles became digital bedrooms, loud, messy, expressive, and deeply personal. Music was not a side feature, it was a core pillar. Bands could upload songs directly to their profiles. Songs could autoplay when someone visited your page. For the first time, unsigned musicians could reach thousands, sometimes millions of listeners without a record label. Local bands became global overnight. Entire music scenes flourished on the platform, from punk and emo to hip hop and indie rock. MySpace was not just hosting music, it was shaping taste. Then there was the social hierarchy. The top 8 feature became infamous. Users had to publicly rank their closest friends, assigning them visible slots on their profile. This led to jealousy, drama, friendships ending, and constant reshuffling. It may sound trivial, but it mattered deeply, especially to teenagers and young adults. The internet was no longer anonymous. It was emotional, public, and deeply tied to real world relationships. Teenagers flocked to MySpace because it felt like a place that belonged to them. Adults and corporations had not yet arrived in force. There were no parents commenting, no teachers watching, no employers scanning profiles. It was raw and unfiltered. Profiles were often poorly designed, overloaded with flashing images and unreadable fonts. But that chaos was part of the appeal. It was freedom without polish. Growth came fast, faster than almost anyone anticipated. MySpace spread primarily through word of mouth and peer pressure. If your friends were on MySpace, you needed to be there too. The network effect kicked in hard. Every new user made the platform more valuable. Schools, local scenes, and social circles formed entire ecosystems inside the site. By the mid 2000s, MySpace was no longer just popular, it was dominant. It surpassed major websites in traffic and became one of the most visited destinations on the internet in the United States. For many users, opening a browser meant going straight to MySpace before anything else. It was where messages were checked, music was discovered, and social status was maintained. Brands began to notice. Media outlets began to notice. Musicians treated it as essential infrastructure. A band without a MySpace page might as well not exist. Concert promotions, fan interactions, and music releases were all routed through the platform. It blurred the line between creator and audience in a way that had never existed before. At its height, MySpace felt unstoppable. It had the users, The culture, the artist, and the momentum. It had become embedded in daily life. People customized profiles late into the night, learned basic coding without realizing it, and curated their identity for anyone who might stumble onto their page. It was messy, imperfect, and deeply human, but beneath the surface of this explosive success were cracks that were not yet obvious. The same freedom that made MySpace beloved also made it difficult to manage. The same chaos that felt expressive also created technical strain. And while users were building identities and communities, decisions were being made behind the scenes that would shape the platform's future in ways most users never saw coming. At the peak of its power, MySpace stood at a crossroads without realizing it. It could evolve, refine, and lead the future of social media, or it could prioritize short term growth and control over long term sustainability. The choices that followed would determine whether MySpace remained the center of the internet or became a warning etched into its history. When MySpace reached its peak, it was no longer just a website run by developers. It was a media empire in the making, and that shift changed everything. In 2005, MySpace was acquired by News Corporation for approximately $580 million. At the time the purchase was celebrated as a brilliant move, MySpace was exploding in popularity, traditional media companies were desperate to understand the internet, and News Corp believed it had just secured the future. The problem was that News Corp did not truly understand what made MySpace powerful. To its new owners, MySpace was not a community or a culture, it was traffic. And traffic meant advertising. Almost immediately, priorities began to shift. The goal was no longer to build the best possible user experience. The goal became monetization at scale. Advertising deals were signed rapidly, including a major agreement with Google that guaranteed massive revenue, but also locked MySpace into a model that depended on keeping users clicking through pages loaded with ads. Profiles became heavier, pages loaded slower, banner ads, video ads, and pop ups multiplied. What had once felt like a personal space now felt crowded and intrusive. Users tolerated it at first because there was nowhere else to go, but the experience was noticeably degrading. At the same time, MySpace's technical foundation was struggling, allowing millions of users to customize profiles with unrestricted HTML and CSS had consequences. Pages broke constantly. Some profiles took ages to load, others crashed browsers entirely. Security vulnerabilities became common, malware and phishing links spread easily through messages and comments. The platform was flexible, but it was fragile. Instead of addressing these issues with a long-term vision, MySpace leadership hesitated. Cleaning up the platform would have required restricting customization, rewriting large portions of the site, and potentially upsetting users in the short term. The company chose not to rock the boat even as the boat began taking on water. Internally, MySpace lacked a clear product direction. Leadership changed frequently. Different teams pushed different priorities. Some wanted to focus on music. Others wanted to become a general media portal. Others wanted to compete with video platforms. The result was a platform that tried to be everything and excelled at nothing. While MySpace was struggling to define itself, a competitor was quietly doing the opposite. Facebook launched with a narrow focus. It emphasized real names, clean design, and consistent structure. There was no chaotic customization. Every profile looked the same. At first, this made Facebook seem boring compared to MySpace. But that simplicity turned out to be its greatest strength. Facebook loaded faster, it felt organized, it felt stable. And most importantly, it felt safe for older users, professionals, and eventually families. While MySpace was still seen as a place for teens, bands, and loud expression, Facebook positioned itself as a universal social platform. MySpace dismissed Facebook early on. Internally, MySpace executives reportedly viewed it as niche, limited, and unthreatening. After all, MySpace had far more users and far more cultural influence. But Facebook was not trying to beat MySpace at its own game. It was building a different game entirely. Meanwhile, MySpace's brand began to blur. Was it a social network, a music platform, an entertainment hub, a news site? Users were no longer sure. Each redesign attempted to fix problems, but often made things worse. Features were added and removed without clear explanation. The interface became more cluttered, not less. Trust also began to erode. Spam messages increased. Fake accounts multiplied. Users felt less in control of their experience. The freedom that once defined MySpace now felt like neglect. The platform no longer felt like it belonged to the users. It felt owned, managed, and exploited. By the late 2000s, the warning signs were undeniable. Growth slowed, engagement dropped. Users began creating Facebook accounts just to try it out, while still maintaining MySpace profiles. Then they stopped logging into MySpace as often. Then they stopped updating it. Then they stopped visiting altogether. MySpace still had massive numbers on paper, but momentum had shifted. Cultural relevance was slipping away, and once that was gone, numbers meant very little. Social platforms do not die all at once, they decay quietly, one user at a time. Behind the scenes, executives scrambled to respond, but the advantage was gone. The platform that once defined online identity was now reacting instead of leading. Decisions that had once seemed small, prioritizing ads over experience, ignoring technical debt, underestimating competitors, had compounded into a crisis. By the time MySpace fully recognized the threat it was facing, the internet had already moved on. The rise had been explosive, but the fall had begun slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. By the time MySpace realized how much ground it had lost, the damage was already irreversible. Social platforms survive on habit, relevance, and trust. Once those break, users do not slowly return. They leave, and they do not look back. As Facebook's user base surged, the migration away from MySpace accelerated. What began as casual experimentation turned into a full scale exodus. Users stopped customizing their profiles. Messages went unanswered, comment sections fell silent, bands that once relied on MySpace for discovery shifted their focus elsewhere. The network effect that had fueled MySpace's rise now worked against it. When friends left, there was no reason to stay. MySpace attempted to respond, but every move came too late or moved in the wrong direction. Leadership pushed a dramatic redesign intended to clean up the platform and modernize its appearance. Customization was restricted, profiles became more uniform. The very thing that had defined MySpace's identity was stripped away in an attempt to compete with Facebook's simplicity. Instead of winning users back, the redesign alienated those who remained. At the same time, the company doubled down on music, attempting to rebrand itself as a music-focused platform rather than a general social network. On paper, this made sense. Music had always been one of MySpace's greatest strengths. In reality, the internet had already changed. Streaming platforms were emerging, social discovery was happening elsewhere. MySpace was trying to reclaim a past that no longer existed. Traffic continued to collapse. Advertising revenue fell with it. Layoffs followed. Entire teams were cut as the company struggled to stay afloat. Once a crown jewel of the internet, MySpace became a liability passed from owner to owner at increasingly lower valuations. What had sold for hundreds of millions of dollars was later sold for a fraction of that price. The site never fully disappeared. It lingered, redesigned again and again, trying to find a purpose. But relevance does not come from redesigns alone. It comes from trust, consistency, and understanding what users want before they leave. MySpace had lost all three. What ultimately killed MySpace was not Facebook alone, it was complacency. It was a failure to evolve while assuming dominance would last forever. It was prioritizing short term monetization over long term health. It was misunderstanding that a social platform is not just a product, it is a relationship with its users. MySpace also became a lesson for every platform that followed. Facebook learned the importance of speed, consistency, and controlled growth. Later platforms learned to avoid unrestricted customization that fractured performance and security. They learned that user experience is not optional and that culture matters as much as code. Yet MySpace's legacy should not be reduced to failure. It pioneered online identity. It taught millions of people basic web design without formal education. It reshaped the music industry by giving artists direct access to audiences. It proved that the internet could be personal, emotional, and expressive. For a generation, MySpace was not just a website, it was a memory, a place where friendships formed, bands were discovered, and identities were shaped. Its fall was not sudden, but it was final. And in that fall, it left behind a roadmap of mistakes and innovations that still influence the digital world today. The internet moves fast. Platforms rise quickly, peak briefly, and disappear quietly. MySpace was the first social media giant to learn that lesson the hard way. It showed the world what was possible and what happens when possibility is taken for granted. Even after MySpace stopped being the center of the internet, it still had something most tech giants spend billions trying to manufacture: a feeling. And a big part of that feeling had a name and a face. For millions of users, MySpace did not feel like a faceless corporation. It felt like a place that knew you were there. That illusion came from the simplest trick in the history of social media: The first friend. When people created a MySpace profile, they did not start alone. They instantly had a friend already added. Tom. Tom Anderson, the co founder of MySpace, became the default first connection for new users. His profile picture was plain and friendly, him smiling in a white t shirt, standing in front of a whiteboard. It was low budget, not polished, not corporate, and that was the point. When a platform is new, empty, and intimidating, a built in friend makes it feel warm. It was like walking into a huge party where someone immediately waves you over and says, "You're good. You belong here." That detail mattered more than most people realized because in the mid 2000s, MySpace was chaotic, but it also felt personal. And Tom was the symbol of that. Not a celebrity, not an ad, not a brand account pretending to be human, just a guy who was there first. But as MySpace became bigger and ownership shifted into corporate hands, the site changed from a hangout built by internet people into a product managed by executives. And in that kind of environment, the symbol of a friendly founder can start to look like a liability. Tom stepped down as president in 2009, and by 2010, he was no longer the automatic first friend for new users, replaced by an official account commonly referred to as Today on MySpace. To users, that change felt small, almost like trivia, but psychologically, it was huge. Removing Tom was like scraping the name off the front door. It signaled that the site was no longer a weird, personal, early internet clubhouse. It was now a managed platform trying to be a media property. Even if people could not explain it, they could feel it. And that feeling connected directly to something else MySpace did better than any platform before or after. It created a visual culture. People remember MySpace as messy, with glitter backgrounds, autoplay music, and unreadable fonts. But inside that chaos, a specific aesthetic took shape. Not just on the site, but in real life, in schools, malls, concerts, and bedrooms lit by computer screens at midnight. The emo and scene eras did not merely use MySpace, they were amplified by it, and in key ways shaped by it. The platform's limitations and features pushed users into certain visual habits. Early digital cameras and low light webcams produced grainy, high contrast selfies. People learned angles that worked with cheap sensors. Heavy eyeliner popped more on blown out photos. Haircuts that looked dramatic in pixelated images became a signature. Side swept bangs, choppy layers, bright streaks, jet black dye, and exaggerated contrast became a look that was built for MySpace photos. Even the way profiles worked reinforced it. Autoplay music meant your page had a soundtrack. Many users chose melancholic, emotional songs that matched the identity they wanted to project. The profile became a stage where your taste in music, your mood, and your social identity all blended into one performance. You were not just telling people who you were showing them, and you were doing it with visuals, music, and public social ranking. That is why MySpace did not just host subcultures, it helped distribute them. A teenager in a small town could suddenly see how kids in bigger scenes dressed, styled hair, posed, and talked. Aesthetic spread at internet speed. And because MySpace profiles were intensely personal, that aesthetic spread through imitation, not instruction. People copied code, copied layouts, copied photo styles, copied bands, and built identity from the pieces. Scene culture, in particular, is often described as flourishing on MySpace as a platform tied closely to internet fame and social visibility. MySpace was cool in a way that is hard to recreate now. It was messy, expressive, dramatic, emotional, loud, and sometimes cringe, but it was undeniably alive. Then Facebook arrived and did something that felt boring at first, but was ultimately unstoppable. It became useful. Here's the simplest way to understand why MySpace lost. MySpace was a hangout. Facebook became infrastructure. MySpace was built around personal expression. That is what made it powerful, but also what made it fragile. Cool platforms are dependent on taste, culture, and the feeling of being in the right place at the right time. Cool can vanish overnight. Cool can be replaced. Cool can be ruined simply by the wrong group of people arriving. Once it stops feeling like yours, you leave. Facebook did not need to stay cool. Facebook became a utility, a social directory, a tool people used because it solved practical problems. It was clean, fast, consistent, and easy to understand. It was where you could find classmates, confirm someone's name, plan events, share photos with family, join groups, and keep up with people you did not necessarily want to text. A utility does not need to feel exciting, it just needs to work. That difference explains something important. MySpace's strength was identity performance. Facebook's strength was identity verification. MySpace let you be whoever you wanted to look like. Facebook encouraged you to be who you actually were. MySpace was a stage, Facebook was a directory, and when the internet transitioned into the real name era, the stage got less valuable than the directory. MySpace tried to respond by cleaning itself up, by rebranding, by pushing music harder, by redesigning, by chasing whatever it thought Facebook had. But chasing usefulness when you were built for cool is almost impossible, because the moment you remove what made you expressive, you are no longer the cool hangout. But you also are not the useful tool people have already adopted. You end up in the worst position possible. Not distinctive enough to be loved, not reliable enough to be needed. That is why MySpace did not just decline, it lost its identity. The customization became a burden. The ads made it feel exploited. The spam made it feel unsafe. The redesigns made it feel unfamiliar. And removing Tom, the first friend, symbolically marked the moment the platform stopped feeling like a place made by people and started feeling like a product, trying to hold on to attention. In the end, MySpace left behind two legacies at the same time. One legacy is cultural. It proved the internet could be personal, aesthetic, and emotional. It shaped music discovery and youth identity. It helped define what social media could feel like. The other legacy is a warning. If a platform survives on cool, it has to evolve without losing its soul. And if it tries to become useful after it has already lost trust, it is usually too late. MySpace was the first social network to hit the mountaintop and then tumble off it. It was the first big reminder that online empires are not permanent. They live and die by the invisible things people feel when they log in, whether it feels like home, whether it feels alive, whether it still feels like it belongs to them. Thank you for watching this story. If you enjoyed learning something new today, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment telling us what you thought of this story.